Yes indeed, gentlemen, this video is for the chads, for the heroes and the martyrs who are thinking about playing a tank or a healer in the next patch, or perhaps not the next patch itself, maybe 9.2. Maybe you're starting to get this itch, you're starting to think, maybe it's time to try something else, maybe it's time to try something new as we are getting closer to new content. That is something that happens pretty much every time. The more you play with a character, the more prone you are to get bored with it or to feel like you want to try something different. So we went over the melee DPS and then we went over the range DPS that you could play in the next patch. So it's time to look at real roles now, tanks and healers. Choosing or even just getting interested in a tank or a healer functions in a similar way to how you get interested in a DPS. Of course, they do different things and they work in different ways, but the general idea on why you're gonna choose something stays the same. For example, one of the ideas is being popular. This is something that you always keep in mind when you want to play. Unless you're trying to play a tank for your solo activities, maybe you want to do Torghast, you want to have a tank to farm old content more easily or something like that, in which case it's whatever, really. Doesn't matter if you're playing a super popular tank or a super unpopular healer, for example. But in the case of you wanting to play an MMO with the second M being part of it, the multiplayer part, then popularity is going to play a role. Because, of course, a community, it's going to develop its own list, its own rating system for the value, the power of characters, of specs, of players, which turns into what you know as meta. So, of course, it's much more easier for you to get into the content if you're playing a popular spec, which is very often a valued point that people look for. So, when you look at the tanks and the healers, if you're looking at popular specs, at the moment the most popular tank spec overall for all content is Protection Paladin. If you're looking at raid encounters, then it's Death Knight and Brewmaster Monk, and if you're looking at Mythic Plus, is more Guardian Druid and Vengeance Demon Hunter. Yes, this is what we went over the last time we checked on tanks. Tanks are the most diverse and varied of the roles. They are the ones where you have the highest chances of finding a tank that is always going to be wanted. Besides the fact that tanks are going to be more wanted than your average DPS or even more wanted than healers, so that's already easier for you to have more options, but even then they are very, very diverse right now. Of course, not every tank spec for every type of activity. As I said, if you were thinking about playing Mythic Plus, for example, if you wanted a Mythic Plus tank, the fact that Blood Death Knight is very popular in raid encounters is not going to help you too much in Mythic Plus. And vice versa, if you wanted to play Guardian Druid, then it's much more viable for you to find a lot of people searching for you and looking for you in Mythic Plus than people looking for raid Guardian Druids. But that still leaves you with a lot of options. I have pretty much mentioned all of the tanks except for one, which is Protection Warrior. So this is the only one that if you were purely looking about popularity, if you were purely worried about finding a tank that is considered, at the very least in one of the activities, then Protection Warrior for now is the only one that is left kind of off of this conversation. When you look at healers, the spread is not as great, is not as even as when you're looking at tanks, because when you're looking at raid encounters, then the most popular ones are Paladin and Shaman. When you're looking at Mythic Plus, the most popular ones are Paladin and Shaman. So this is much more straightforward and much more strict when it comes to popularity if you're looking at healers, because we have kept up this status quo at the very least for the entire expansion. Even when we go back in BFA, it was similar for raid encounters. It wasn't the same for Mythic Plus. Restoration Shaman in Mythic Plus was very weak compared to Resto Druid, which was the big thing for a long time. So now it has changed. So if you were looking at popular specs when you're looking at healers, then the situation has been very, very static for a while, and it does point towards remaining like this for the following patches at least, because we haven't seen, at the very least for now, some major balance tuning that is going to drastically change the way people view these healers. So for the moment you can just assume it is going to remain the same. Then you have another point, which was another one that you can also compare the DPS with, which was the diversity, the uniqueness of the different options and choices that these specs have. So How often can they change? How varied they are? This is a particularly important point because from 9.1.5 you will be able to play different covenants, whenever you want, which means if you have the option to play 2 covenants or even 3 covenants at the same time, it's going to make you much more diverse, much more fluid and versatile than another spec which is like completely locked into a single covenant, and you already know it's going to be playing with the same covenant and the same legendary, no matter if you're doing PvP, PvE, Mythic Plus raids and whatnot. This can also play on a lot of players, a lot of people who would like that type of freedom on its characters. Other people won't care at all, right? Other people will just be, I can just find my diversity on my alts. I can just log in another character if I want to play something else. I would rather have my tank or my healer have, for example, be more popular or have the type of damage profile or healing profile that I enjoy rather than being diverse. So for the people who are interested in this type of point, there is some possibility for diversity, much more than tanks when it comes to healers. You have Restoration Shaman, who is one of the most diverse healers in theory, once you can start swapping covenants, because Restoration can work with pretty much all of the covenants. Probably Nightphase, the only one that is the weaker one, but Necrolord, Kyrian and Ventir are all playable and all strong after they have gotten buffed multiple times to put the other covenants at the same level of Necrolord. Now they are actually even stronger, so there will be room for them to change. There is also talent variance when it comes to Restoration Shaman. If you're healing a small group, if you're healing a big group, you're going to be healing in a different way, so it's actually pretty diverse. Mistweaver Monk is also pretty diverse. They used to play Kyrian, they can still play Necrolord, and now they are playing more Ventir, so this is going to continue in 9.1.5 when they can swap these covenants freely. They do also have some more emphasis or some less emphasis on their fist weaving build and how much they want to focus on that, so they can also change that playstyle. The ones who are much more locked into their normal playstyle are Restoration Druid and Discipline Priest. Well, this comes by itself. Discipline Priest is very, very static in what it wants to do. It has a very fixed rotation, a very fixed ramp, which works always in the same way. They did change. They are in the process of changing, depending on the situation, between Spirit Shell and Evangelism, but it doesn't change too much how they play that. It just shifts when they use that, rather than using it before the damage come out, they use it after. It's more or less the same. Their entire battery of options remains the same. They are still Kyrian after moving from Ventir. It is currently the best way to perform for Discipline, so there is less of a room for them to vary. The same can be said for Restoration Druid. Restoration Druid's playstyle is very, very fixed on how they have always worked, which is healing over time, spam, severe spam of heal over time. It hasn't changed in a long time, and what also hasn't changed in a long time, which hurts their possible diversity, is their covenant, which is still Nightphase. It is still looking like it's going to continue to be Nightphase, so there is less window for them for this type of diversity if you're looking for it. Then you have Paladin and Holy Priest, who are a little bit in the middle. Holy Paladin has moved almost completely now from Kyrian to Ventir. They will still have the option to go Kyrian now. Maybe one day you're not looking for top damage, you're not looking for pushing your damage, you want to be more safe, you want to have more overall sustained healing, for example, and you can just relax with Kyrian, with Divine Toll, and have an easier time healing at the cost of your damage. Or you can go Ventir and try to focus much more on damage dealing. You also have some, now at least some more variety. Holy Paladin was much more fixed on their shock barrier, holy shock, glimmer of light, rotation and build and how it worked. Now it has been changing heavily. They can actually move away from all of that. They can start using different legendaries, they can start using different talents, even different playstyles centered around Light of the Martyr in larger encounters, larger groups like the raid, so it is giving them more diversity. Holy Priest does also have a few more options, even more so in the Covenant choices. They are in a similar situation to Resto Shaman, where they don't have a clear winner when it comes to Covenant, which means as a result they can kind of play most of them. So they will have more variety when it comes to 9.1.5 and the ability to freely use Covenants whenever you want. As I said, when it comes to tanks, however, it's a little bit more static. You know, at the moment, most of the Vengeance tanks are all Kyrian, all of the Guardian tanks are Night Fae, you have the Brewmaster Monks who are Kyrian as well, the Prot Paladins are also Kyrian, the Prot Warriors are also Kyrian, and the DKs, the Blood DKs are Ventir. There is some room for some of these specs. For example, DK can go not Ventir, so to speak, in raid encounters. Paladins can go Ventir as well in raid encounters because of the damage they can push in the bosses and the less use a Prot Paladin gets from Divine Toll in a raid encounter. But overall, it is less diverse than healers. 9.1.5 for sure will give options to these tanks to try out other covenants. Maybe at the moment nobody's playing certain covenants, but then again it's also very hard to try them. It's not a child's play to just say, I feel like today I want to try out Necrolord, because it's going to take you hours to bring that up, it's going to take you a lot of grinding to even be able to test it out. So it's not that you get to experience it very easily, whereas in 9.1.5 you are going to have more chances to make that happen. So there is room for this to change. There is room for more tanks discovering more viable and stronger Covenant builds in the future, but for the moment they are more static and less diverse than healers. What about the damage profile? Because for DPS it was pretty simple, right? For DPS, the only other thing you could be interested in outside of the popularity, outside how diverse they were, is how do they do their damage. That's very simple. How do they play? That's the only thing they do as a DPS, it's damage. Well, for tanks and healers, it's completely different though. You do have the damage component of all of them still, but then you also have, for tanks, how they take damage and how they are supposed to deal with taking damage, and for healers is how they are supposed to heal the damage the rest of the group and themselves are taking. So those are two different things you have to look at. The vast majority of these systems can be grouped together into two different options, which is the proactive way and the reactive way. Knowing something is happening and you trying to build your character to prevent that the best you can, or knowing something is happening and preparing yourself so you can deal with it after it happens. For example, Blood Death Knight. Blood Death Knight is completely reactive because Blood Death Knight works by healing himself. And I don't know if you know this, but you cannot heal yourself if you're already at full health. First you have to be beat up. First you have to get low in your health so you can heal yourself up. So Blood Death Knight is completely reactive. He has to wait for things to come, and after they have come, he can react to that. Other tanks are going to be more proactive. So they have things like defensives, damage taken reduction, taking the damage in as they know it's coming in, and they have already acted on it. That's what being proactive means. Like a Prot Warrior using Ignore Pain and Shield Block. Shield Block blocks attacks, which means you have to use it before the damage even comes in. Ignore Pain absorbs the damage, which means you have to use it before the damage even comes in. That is a proactive type of tank. And then you have the tanks in the middle. You have, for example, Druid and Paladin. Druid and Paladin can use damage reduction abilities, armor increase abilities like Shield of the Righteous and like Ironfor, which are of course proactive. You have to use them before the damage comes in, but then they also have the options to heal themselves, like Frenzied Regeneration or Word of Glory, which means you have to use them after. So you do have a mix, a combination of ways in which they can work. Blood Death Knight with its healing is much more reactive. Brewmaster Monk with its main brew, Purifying Brew, is much more reactive, with some options to being proactive. With Celestial Brew, you have tanks like Guardian and Prot Paladin being much more in the middle, or Protection Warrior being much more proactive. When it comes to healers, though, healers, on the other hand, have to do something similar, which is either prevent the damage to even come through, or set yourself up with some heal abilities that continue after the damage has happened, or things that happen after the damage. You have, of course, healers that are almost completely proactive, like a Discipline Priest. Discipline Priest needs to know where the damage is coming out, because they have to use Absorb Shields. Absorb Shields are, the kings, are the pinnacle of proactive healing or proactive tanking, because it's something that is going to absorb the damage. So it needs to be there before the damage happens. A Discipline Priest, whether or not they are doing it with Spirit Shell, which is the absorb, or with Evangelism and their normal rotation, which is the heal, they need to have tagged multiple people, multiple players with Atonement. So before the damage even happens, they need to have started their rotation, their ramp, before they can heal. You have the complete opposite, which is Resto Druid. Resto Druid is just going to blanket the raid with heals over time. So before the damage happens, after the damage happens, the heal over time is going to be on the targets. They have some, of course, some parts of it are going to be reactive, like Wild Growth. You want to use it after the damage has happened. But the main part of the Restoration Druid is to continue using these HOTS mechanics. Then you have much more reactive specs like Restoration Shaman. Restoration Shaman's heals, even though part of those can be put on targets before the damage is even out, like the hot part of Riptide. The vast majority of their healing is going to be wait for people to take damage and heal them. Same goes for Holy Paladin and same goes for Holy Priest. And this can be important because people are going to enjoy different ways of healing and different ways of tanking. It is also going to be, in the majority of the cases, more difficult. It is going to put more strain on you to be proactive rather than being reactive, because it means you need to know about the encounter, you need to know about the fight ahead of time, you need to know what's happening, right? You need to know it so that you can plan for it. Whereas if you are reactive, you have less of a necessity to know things ahead of time. You can just react to what's happening. The other part, which is less about the damage profile and more about the damage, is something that needs to be mentioned, because some people are still old school, they are stuck in the old ways, they don't think tanks should be doing much of any damage at all, and they certainly don't think healers should be doing any damage. So this could also drive people away if they are expected, if they are looking to play a healer, but then they are also expected to be doing damage, and they're like, no way, I'm not gonna be playing a healer if I have to be criticized for doing low damage. What is this? I am a healer, I want to heal. Same or similar could be said for tanks. And then there are other people who will be the exact opposite. Maybe they enjoy being able to do something else other than healing if they are a healer, or maybe they enjoy being able to do good damage if they are a tank, or maybe it's a completely different reason. I am neutral, I don't really have an opinion about doing damage, but if you are telling me that if I am a healer who does no damage means I will not be accepted into groups, I will not be taken because that's what people want nowadays, then I will go for a healer that does damage. The split is quite simple. At the top of the damage when it comes to healers, it's Discipline Priest and Holy Paladin. They actually have damage as part of their rotation. You are expected at any time really to be doing damage, and as a result you will be doing the best damage more or less. You have Mistweaver Monk, who is doing damage, but not that much. That's the problem for them right now. They are using the fist weaving strategy most of the time, and even then, while using damage abilities as part of the rotation, their damage is not even that high. So this is probably the worst of both worlds. For healers who don't like to do damage, they are expected to do damage as Mistweaver, and for people who like to do damage, Mistweaver is not doing high enough damage anyways, so that's kind of bad for both styles. Then you have specs with much lower damage overall, like Holy Priest and Restoration Shaman. You have then the switch between raids and Mythic Plus. Restoration Shaman has way more options to do way more damage when it comes to Mythic Plus compared to raids. Same goes for Resto Druid. Resto Druid can min-max itself to do much more damage thanks to shapeshifting, thanks to changing into different forms, but that is much more advanced. It's a much more complicated way of doing damage than simply do your rotation like you are for Discipline and for Holy Paladin. When it comes to tanks, on the other hand, Prot Paladin has been for the entire expansion pretty much the top damage dealer out of all tanks, and Protection Warrior and Blood Decay have been the lowest damage dealing tanks in the expansion. Then you have the balanced middle, which is Brewmaster, Vengeance and Guardian. Usually it's between Brewmaster and Guardian, who is the second highest damage dealing, and usually, just like Restoration Druid, it's about whether or not the Guardian Druid is finding ways to shapeshift into feral form or into Boomkin form to do extra damage. Either way, he is at the top with Brewmaster right below Paladin, and Vengeance is in the middle when it comes to damage dealing. Damage dealing for tanks is much less of an issue because you are still gonna do damage with your normal rotation. You're gonna be doing that as default. You're not like some of the healers who have to go out of their way to do damage. They have to start risking not healing to do damage instead, like a Restoration Shaman, for example. In their case, it's going to be much more natural. So even if you don't like doing damage as a tank, most of the time you will be able to do your damage by just being a tank, essentially. Now, this is what we have for the moment for the upcoming 9.1.5 patch. We know the popularity of the tanks and the healers, whether or not you are interested in popular picks to make sure you are chosen, to make sure you are taken as a meta spec. You know about the diversity, the variety, the options available to these tanks and healers, whether or not you like to be diverse and to have multiple options for you, or if you really just don't care, as well as their damage profile, their healing profile, their tanking profile, how do they work, whether they are proactive or reactive, whether they are doing good damage or they are expected to be doing good damage, or if they really are not right now. These are all things I think are pretty important for you to gauge, to think about when you're looking into, you're trying to get into or be interested into playing a tank or a healer. This is what we have for today, for Friday. It's the start of the weekend, so we can stop now. Then you can go and do your thing you do on weekends. In my case is get woken up at 9 in the morning by the lawnmower down below. Thank you guys for watching the video. If you want to support the channel, you can just leave a like to the video, comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel. And for now, we can leave. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, Blizzard is continuing their fight against boobas. I'm not happy. Wear boobas.